Okay, I am delighted to welcome you all to Library Millages, from the ballot box, from the ballot language to the ballot box, what to know before you go for your millage. This millage is being presented by Ann Surink, who is an attorney with Foster Swift, Collins, and Smith, and who no doubt most of you, if not all of you, already know. And we are very lucky and privileged to have her. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ann.
So if those of you who have seen this presentation, it's not much different if you've seen it in the last couple of years because the law really hasn't changed. But I do find it kind of interesting every time I go through a millage season that, you know, there's still a lot of things that people don't realize or haven't looked at. And so I want to go through what the legal requirements are, but I also want to, I will point out some pitfalls and some things that you need to think about before going through your ballot proposal. This is the point in the presentation. I've never done this one virtually. I always do it live. I try to figure out where you guys are from, not specifically the library, but what kind of library are you? Are you a district library? Are you a city library? Are you a PA 164 library? Just because some of the information here may be more applicable to certain types of libraries. So I think Claire is, or somebody, Becky maybe will be monitoring the chat. So obviously if there's things that come up or that are not clear, I'm happy to take questions during the presentation. There'll also be a question and answer session after the presentation. So whatever works for you guys with respect to that. All right, Claire, you want to?
Okay.
So one of the things that you always have to look at when you talk about millages is your authority. So if you are going for a millage, one of the primary things, the first things you have to do is to decide, well, what kind of library am I and what authority do I have? So the first kind of library I want to talk about is a district library, since typically most of the libraries that come to these presentations tend to be district. So Claire, I think the next slide is about the district library. So district libraries actually have a unique advantage with respect to millages, because you as a district library are authorized to levy up to 4 mills. And this, as you'll see from other types of libraries, is unique. I mean, it's actually quite a bit of millage. Most libraries don't go anywhere close to that 4 mill cap, but you do have the authority to establish up to 4 mills. District libraries, one of the common questions that I get, or maybe one of the misunderstandings, is that the district library board itself has the authority, the sole authority to put that millage on the ballot, whether it's a new millage or a renewal or an increase, whatever it is. The district library board holds that authority. There's no right of the participating municipalities to veto that or to provide input or to ask to see the ballot question. Really, district library is an autonomous board. You have the sole authority, so boards should realize that. District libraries can also have 2 mills of the 4 in perpetuity, and the other 2 are limited to 20 years. So that's a key part of district library that's also interesting. Perpetual millages are very rare in the millage world. Most townships, cities, villages, counties cannot do perpetual millages. Most of them are limited to 20 years right now by a constitutional amendment. So the fact that you have a statute that allows you to do that is pretty extraordinary. This comes about for district libraries a lot. For example, some district libraries decide to go the route of having a millage instead of a voted bond, but they want the millage to coincide with the duration of the bond. So just because it's up to 20 years and 2 can be in perpetuity doesn't mean that you have only 2 choices. For example, you could have up to 2 mills for 30 years. It's over the 20 years, but not close to, it's not perpetuity, but there's a lot of flexibility there. But one of the things as a district library to make sure, and this applies to all libraries, is to go back, figure out exactly how much millage you're levying now, figure out if you're getting close to your cap, and so you don't run into a problem where you go to the ballot and you ask for more millage than you're authorized to have. District-wide district library millages have to be district-wide, which means that the entire district has to be levying the same millage. This has it hasn't happened so much, I think, lately. I think we saw this a lot more years ago when, there's a lot more district libraries being created, and then district libraries adding to their districts. And it happens every once in a while, but not quite as frequently. But when a district library, for example, adds a new municipality to the district, that new municipality has to vote in the district-wide millage and make sure that you have to make sure that they're levying the exact same millage as the rest of the district. And this is if there's a Headley rollback, that the rollback applies equally to the whole district. And again, the district library board establishes the amount and submits to voters. Okay, so section 10 and 10A PA 164 libraries, we put these together because they basically have the same requirements. So for section 10 or 10A under PA 164, you are formed through a vote of the people. 50 voters at some point in your history signed a petition to create a library. And at that time, a library was required to have the establishment was conditioned upon there being a vote for a tax to support the library. You are a township library and a city library. You have an elected board, but sometimes there's a lot of confusion, especially among the townships in the city, as to who does what and who has what responsibility. It's very important that PA 164, 10, and 10A libraries understand how autonomous they are with respect to millages. Again, as far as the authority, look back at the authority, you can levy up to 2 mills only. Okay, so you have you have half of the millage authorization that a district library would have. Your tax may be for an unlimited duration or specify a number of years. So again, you have that same perpetuity aspect that district libraries do, which is very important. And a lot of you I know have perpetual millages. You can still get a new perpetual millage. And so, but not more than 2 mills. Now, the confusion with PA 164 libraries is by statute, then the millage is collected by the city, township, or village, and it's put into the library fund and then dispersed out of the library fund. So oftentimes I see the city, village, or township thinking that they have more say than they do by law about your millages. Okay, so it's really important to understand that under PA 164, after you have that initial millage that's put in the petition and it's elected, by the voters in your respective municipality, the library board determines how much to levy each year, how and when to go for a renewal, how much you want a renewal, if you want a new millage, if you want extra millage. The statute says that the board by resolution adopts that millage declaration essentially, and then the city, township, or village, it says shall put it on the ballot. So it's a unique issue because you're not actually the taxing authority. The city, village, or township is a taxing authority, but they are mandated to put whatever amount of millage that you want as a library board on the ballot. So this is a very key aspect. If you're having problems with this, if there's a little bit of a push and pull with the authority issue, that's the time to reach out to your attorney so that it can be clarified so that you understand your autonomy here. If you are a Section 1 city library, and many of you I suspect are Section 1 city libraries, you have a very unique funding aspect, which is that you can levy 1 mill annually without a vote of the people, and that's unless it's otherwise prevented by city charter. The difference here between this millage, this annual 1 mill, is that it is the city council that determines how much to levy each year. Again, you can ask, the statute allows you to ask for that second mill through a voted process. But again, this is not within the discretion of the library board. It's the city council that decides this. So the city council decides whether to levy the mill and how much to levy, whether to go for that second mill and how much to levy within that authorization. So this is a little bit, I think, I would characterize it a little bit as a disadvantage for PA 164 Section 1 city libraries on the, if you're checking boxes on the autonomy box. It's a little bit of a con because you just don't have as much autonomy as the Section 10 or 10, Section 10 Township or Village Library or Section 10A City Library. County libraries, I put the statute in here. County libraries are a little bit more vague just because this is what the statute says. And so we work with county libraries to determine, what the appropriate amount of the proposal should be, and to work through the county and putting that on the ballot. So if you're a county library going for a millage, I think contacting your attorney plenty and with an advanced time before that millage, just to sort out any authority issues and how much you can levy, I think would be important. I get a lot of how much, and a lot of libraries have been, they see the penal fines especially diminishing, and it's often hard to determine year to year how much your penal fines will be and how much you need from other sources. But typically these are the other types of resources that you should look to determine whether your millage, what amount of your millage. State aid, penal fines, gifts and endowments, private donations, general fund donations for district library, others funds stated in the district library agreement, contracts and users. And I do pause with district libraries because once the district library is formed, like I said, you have the authority without the participating municipalities to go for a millage. But you should check your district library. If this is the first millage you are doing, you should check your district library agreement just to see what the funding process was set up in there, and whether you're going to have to, if the cities or townships are donating through their general fund or donating through a millage, that may change if you get a district-wide millage. So that's just something to consider with respect to that. So developing ballot language. Ballot language is not, I don't think, very user-friendly. It's not written for I think for most people to really understand. It has to be written in a specific way in order to comply with the statute. So that's what we have to work with. So we try to make it as understandable as possible. But I think there's a few things you need to understand when developing the ballot proposal, because there's certain legal requirements and there are certain other types of requirements. So when moving forward, I want to kind of explain what the legal requirements are and then think of some of the things that will be up to the discretion of your library and how you present it. So the millage rate to be authorized. I mean, this is something sort of obvious. You have to explain it in mills. But most of the ballot proposals, all the ballot proposals I see state that it's 1 mill, for example, and then you have to explain that that's how much per $1,000 of taxable value. So 1 mill is $1 per $1,000 of taxable value. I really caution this because I know a lot of municipalities take their old ballot language and try to manipulate it and change it for the new ballot language. And one of the things they miss is they forget to match to make sure that they say 1 mill and then the dollar amount is the same as what they've stated. It's also important for library boards that change ballot language sort of on the fly at the last minute. For example, they decide they want to go for 1.5 mils instead of 1 mil, and they change the 1 mil but don't change the $1 to $1.50. So those are the things you have to really, the technical parts you have to keep in mind. We often use the term in an amount not to exceed. So we say, shall the library be authorized to levy an amount not to exceed 1 mil? I think it's pretty obvious that the library board would have the discretion. I do think they have the discretion legally to levy whatever amount they want within that 1 mil range, or using this example. But I think we want to make sure that you have that discretion, and there's no you don't want a voter coming back and saying, well, this year you only levied 0.9 mil and you were authorized to levy 1 mil. Our authorization said you had to levy 1 mil, and there's a problem. It's never happened, but we like to avoid anything that could possibly be a problem with respect to millages. The estimated amount of revenue that will be collected in the first year that the millage is authorized and levied. So what you do is basically, if you're going to levy 1 mill, you figure out in the first year that you're going to levy that, what amount of taxable value that would generate. And I think this is a natural thing that you do when you're doing millage planning, because you obviously want to ask for an amount that'll cover your budget. So you ask for, it's expressed in the terms of taxable value. You have to consider what year you're going to first levy this, because if you decide to levy a new millage, for example, and we'll talk about Headley rollback issues, but if you decide to levy a new millage, let's say you go this year in 2021 and you're not going to levy it until 2023, you really should estimate how much taxable value you think you'll be collecting, not this year, but in 2023. So often we take, kind of a standard rate of inflation. It usually doesn't affect it too much. And again, this is just an estimate. I see, and I like to round it off. I see some communities that will say it's estimated to collect, $1,567,066, and you're so it doesn't have to be that precise. We do round it, so keep in mind it is just an estimate. The duration of the millage in years. We recommend that you say it'll be a 20-year millage or a 10-year millage, and then actually state the number of years that you're going to levy it. This example uses 20 years, 2021 to 2020 to 2040. Now, it looks, if you think about it, you think, well, that's 19 years, but it's actually not, because you count both the first year and the last year. And so sometimes mistakes are made in this, and this is one of those things where you don't want there to be mistakes, because if you put, it's more common to have like a 20-year millage, but then the years will actually be 21 years. So then there might be a question of whether you actually ask for a 20 or 21-year millage. We would err on the side of caution and have you renew it or have a new millage after 20 years, but you don't want to be in that situation. We also like to have the numbers in there because, especially if you've got long millages, sometimes you lose track. We've unfortunately had seen circumstances in which there was a mistake or a misunderstanding about what year the last year of levy actually was. And so sometimes communities have to either, miss a year of millage or, have to, go to, great lengths at last minute to get a ballot proposal on just because they haven't looked at your ballot language. So that's sort of one of the things I recommend every time I do this webinar is to do a little bit of homework, is to actually dig out your old ballot language, even if you think it's not up until 2023 and you're thinking, it'll be 2024. It does not hurt to look into that issue sooner than later. You have to consider the year that you'll desire to levy the new initial millage. One of the things that you have to do is tell them the first year of levy. And so, if you're concerned about voter approval and the last year of the levy would be December of 2021, you have to, and you decide to hold the election in November of 2021 for a 10-year millage, you have to, tell them that actually the first year of levy will be 2022 and the last year will be 2031. So again, it's really important to look at this. The library must submit the ballot language to the county clerk, and that's certified. And this is the certification is before the 30th of each year. So this is kind of an important issue that you should really realize, is that, so when you talk about deciding when to first levy the millage, a couple things you have to keep in mind. One is that typically, you guys know this, you fill out an L-4029 of the township, you tell them what your ballot, how much they're going to levy in December. It's due on September 30th. If you have a November election, typically the law will allow you to then amend that 2039 to 4020, sorry, it's a little early on Wednesday, I guess. The L4029 to allow you to then levy it that December. But that's something that you're going to have to really look into and make sure that that gets done, because if you have a November election, you only have maybe less than, a little over 3 weeks to get that amended L4029 to the county clerk in order for that to be levied. Every time you do a millage, my recommendation is to talk with the county clerk about the millage, let them know you're coming, let them figure out if there are any hurdles to getting it on the ballot. The other issue that you have to think about is, and we've run into this a couple times, it doesn't happen that often, but you should make sure that you know when those tax bills go out for your respective municipality. And I'll give you an example of where this can really trip you up. You have to levy, as I mentioned, for example, for district libraries, you have to levy uniformly within the district in the same year. So there are certain municipalities, cities in the state that by charter only levy in the summer, and townships typically levy in the winter. So if you've got a city that can only levy in the summer and a township in your district that can only levy in December, you have to make sure that you ask for that renewal so that the same millage rate can be done in the same year. Because if you go in August on that year, you typically can't levy it the first in that year because you'll miss the city's millage, the summer millage, the summer tax roll. So again, I think one of the issues, we always, whenever I do a millage, I ask like several questions of a client, and this is one of them, is when do the municipalities that collect your taxes levy their taxes? Make sure you understand that, make sure that you're clear with that before you go forward. Most municipalities, I would say, looking at it just historically over the ones that I've done, levy in December, and it's usually not an issue, but because it can be, it's one of those things you should really work out at the time, because you're going to need to know, it's going to affect when you go for your millage, whether you go for your millage a year early to make sure you don't have any, missed opportunities there. You have to have a clear statement of the purpose of the millage. And this is the one where I think you have the most opportunity to be clear with voters, and it's the most opportunity to put, language in here to describe what you're actually going to do with your millage proposal. Michigan law says, and this has been very clear, this is longstanding, you can see the Attorney General opinion interpreting this is from the 50s, that money raised from a millage may not be used for a purpose other than specifically set forth in the ballot language. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of where this can go right or wrong. But for district libraries, the ballot often states language that the funds shall be used for all district library purposes authorized by law. For other types of libraries, you want to be maybe more specific, depending on what you want to use the money for. And I'll give you a couple examples here. There we go. Example of a common problem. We want to use the money to operate a new building, but our ballot language only provides that we can use the money for construction of a new library. Can we use the money for operations of the library? This is one of the things where, there may be, I guess I go about it that my first thought is to be as expansive as you want. But some clients want to make sure that the people know that this money is going to be used for constructing a new building. Well, if you're going to be that narrow, you have to make sure that you understand that what you're making a conscious decision to do that, because it may call into question about whether you can use those for operations. A lot of older ballot proposals, we try to correct this as ballots are renewed, but I think that a lot of older ballot proposals, and if you're coming off a 20-year millage or a long millage, your ballot proposal may just say for the operations of the library. I do think it calls into question whether those proceeds can be used for other things other than operations, capital improvements, for example. I would argue that they could. I think that's the intent of the language, but we want to make sure going forward that there's no question about what the money can be used for. Because if you have a millage and you collect money and you can't use it for the purpose, it has to be held into escrow until you can use it for that purpose. So it's important to be very clear about that. So for example, if you're building a new building, you'd say constructing, operating, equipping, and so that people understand that this money is for the building and then everything involved with a new building. Another common problem, 2 years ago, voters approved a millage for 10 years to operate the John Doe branch of the Newtown District Library. Now we're considering closing the branch. Can we use the millage funds for other purposes? Again, the library may be subject to challenge. You know, it would be, the challenge would be that you're using money inappropriately. Those challenges don't come across very often, but you know, in this day and age, people are you know, looking at their taxes a little more closely. People are a little more heated, so there may be more of a risk in this environment. But again, a fix would make the language more general to operate any branch of the Newtown District Library, or to operate or equip and construct for all district library purposes, which would be more ideal. Another common problem, we just asked voters for an operating millage last year, but the millage is not going to be enough. Do we have to reduce the hours, and we have to reduce the hours the library is open? Can we ask for additional millage to increase hours of operation? Yes, again, you can use, as long as it's within the authorized amount, you can ask for whatever purpose you want. You just have to make sure that if you're going to be purposely specific, because sometimes libraries do want to be purposefully specific, that you understand the ramifications and that you've considered all of that. Let's see. So this gets to be kind of confusing, and it's not as confusing as it was. This was a big problem, I would say, 15 years ago, because this was just sort of our opinion. And since then, the Attorney General has ruled on it, and associations like the Michigan Township Association has come out with material that shares the same view. So it's a little bit easier to explain this to clients and have them understand it. But I'll tell you what the issue is. So you have to have a clear statement, this is the law, indicating whether the proposed millage is a renewal of a previously authorized millage or the authorization of a new millage. To be characterized as a renewal, it must be a true renewal of the millage as last levied. Okay, so, and I'll give you this example. If the voters authorized a millage of 1 mil years ago, but it's been reduced to 0.87 mil, the renewal must be only a renewal of 0.87 mils. So if you want to call it a true renewal, you cannot go back up to 1. And this was the problem that caused a lot of, I think, concern 15 years ago, because, you know, we would be instructing clients about this particular point of law, and they'd see their neighboring townships and cities and villages say, well, it's 1 mil is the renewal. I know it's been rolled back, but 1 mil is the renewal. So again, I think this is a little bit more common. You'll see this, but to restore that full mil. So if you wanted to go back up to the 1 mil, you have to ask for 1 mil, and you have to explain to voters that 0.87 is a renewal and that 0.13 is actually new millage, additional new millage. So what is new millage? New millage is any millage that's not a renewal. So whatever, look at your L4029 for the last year that it was levied, and it's a little tricky because the law, you know, talks about what, you know, when you have to calculate what the last levy is. So that might be something you talk about with your attorney about what that is. But typically, you look at your last year's L4029, figure out if it's been rolled back, and if it's rolled back, that's the renewal, and anything above that is new millage. One of the things that is interesting is you actually don't have to disclose if you have other millages. So for example, let's say you're a library that has a perpetual millage, and you've had a perpetual millage since 1950. So it's been rolled back. So 20 years ago, you asked for new millage to help account for some of that rollback, right? So now you have a perpetual millage, you have you're in the middle of another, you know, 20-year millage, and you realize you need extra money because all of a sudden your population is booming, you need more materials, you need more hours. You don't have to tell voters, oh, we want new millage. Oh, and by the way, we already have 2 other existing underlying millages. You don't have to do that. You just have to deal with the millage that's at issue here. The ballot shall fully disclose each local unit of government to which the revenue from that millage will be dispersed. Again, this is a problem that has been around for a while, thanks to efforts in the library community with the Michigan Library Association, Library of Michigan, everyone who was involved with that process. The law has been amended now to make it a little bit clearer, and we'll get into that. But you have to disclose each local unit of government to which the revenue will be dispersed. So typically, the local unit of government means city, village, township, created or local authority created under state law. Authority would include a downtown development authority, local LDFA, brownfields. So before this amendment, you would have always had to explain to voters that your millage was being captured. And the next slide will explain what the amendment was that you need to think about. So in new millages, and this includes renewals. So anytime you have an election and the election results in a new millage or renewal of an existing millage that's approved after January 1, 2017, those new millages will not be captured by these 6 authorities. Okay, so keep in mind it's not a blanket of any tax capture. The notable one missing from here is the brownfield redevelopment authorities. They can still capture. Brownfields have been very protected by the legislature, for example. Most other types of tax capture entities, you can, as a taxing authority, you can opt out of them at some point, either depending on the authority, either at the onset of the creation of the authority, or whether you have to, or at the time of the tax increment financing plan is developed. It depends on the statute, so you have to look at that. But brownfields, except for like one slight type of brownfield, which is like, I can't remember what it was. It's something that you just never really see. You can't really ever even opt out of a brownfield. So brownfields are really protected, I think, by the legislature. So your new millages, if you asked me 10 years ago, if you had a DDA and you had a new millage and you said, do we have to tell the voters that it's captured by the DDA? The answer would have been yes. The answer today is likely not. And because it's automatically going to be exempt unless there's 2 little caveats to that. One is that the library and the authority may enter into an agreement to allow the capture. And if you do that, you have to notify voters that it would be subject, we have to put language in the ballot proposal letting them know that the DDA, for example, will be receiving proceeds from the millage. So why would you ever want to do that? It happens, and it happens not infrequently, and it really happens a lot with libraries that have benefited from being in the DDA boundaries. The DDA might have done a lot for the library in the last 10 years, and you really get value out of it. I see some questions in the chat, so I just want to clarify something here about I'm talking about new millages. Okay, so anything that has a vote after December or after January 1 of 2017. There are still some your existing millages, which is anything that was voted on and levied prior to that date. Those millages are likely subject to capture unless a couple things happen. One, for example, if they change their boundaries. Second, if they don't have any outstanding debts. That's a whole other sort of webinar. So I don't, that's whether your existing millages are still subject to capture is a question for your lawyer, and that should be it's very fact-based, and that's something you should look into if you have a question about that. So what I'm talking about here with the DDAs is only your new millages, anything that you would put on the ballot after January 1, 2017. So I just wanted to clarify that. City millages, when we're going through the process, city millages had a little bit slightly different process of, and so if you are a city and you're going for a voted millage, I think you should talk to your lawyer about this issue with respect to your particular city. So that's just one little caveat I want to add to that. If it was intended that if you read articles and the purpose of this was that, if you are an average voter, you might not understand that when you vote for a library millage, that 100% of those proceeds aren't going to the library. That if you've got an entity that captures your taxes, that some of those taxes might go to a different entity. District libraries, I think, really struggle with this because if you are let's just say you're a district library that has a city and a township that are the two participating municipalities in your district, and you have a city DDA, the township people, even though it's one district-wide millage and you're one entity, sometimes the township people are objecting to their money going to the city DDA. That's not how it works. It's not exactly what happens, but that's why education, voter education, is very important. And so that's something that to think about if you end up having, for some reason, to disclose on your ballot proposal that the money's going elsewhere. I think voter education is very important with that. So do you need one or two questions? Most ballot proposals that I write are one question. And we have to go through an analysis to determine whether there's an issue about whether it should be one question or two questions, but there's a little bit of, I guess, decision making on behalf of the library if the law is not, the law prevents you from doing what you want to do, and I'll explain to you what that is right now. The Property Tax Act, which governs what has to be in the ballot proposal, says that a taxing unit that levies a millage shall not submit a single question to the electors of the taxing unit requesting both a renewal of a millage and a new millage if the new millage is greater than 0.5 mils. And I've got a couple examples of how this plays out with how it could play out with your library. Okay. This is the example that illustrates the point here. And you have to think about how this Headley rollback plays into it. Okay, so our library previously levied 1.5 mils for 20 years. The millage expires this year, and the library currently levies 0.97 mil due to the Headley Amendment. If we want to ask for the restoration of the 1.5 mils, do we need one or two questions? The answer to this specific question is that you need two questions, because as you can see, the renewal is 0.97 mils and the new additional millage is 0.53 mils. So again, the statute says you can't ask for one question unless the millage, the new millage, which would include the Headley rollback amount that you're trying to recapture, is 0.5 mils or less. And so I think we have one more example of this, and then we can talk about some possible fixes to that. So our library desires to ask voters for renewal of a previously authorized millage and ask for the amount lost due to the Headley Amendment. Again, it's another similar fact situation. Our library needs to renew a previously authorized millage. The library has an expiring millage that was 1 mil, but now it's been reduced to 0.9 mils. Okay, in this situation, and this is the more common situation, you can ask voters to renew the 0.9 mil and approve an additional 0.1 mil in one question, since the new millage is less than 0.5 mils. Okay, so this is sort of an easy answer. The way we would say that in a ballot question is something like, shall the library levy 1 mil, of which 0.9 mil is a renewal of a previously authorized millage and 0.1 mil is new additional millage. And we may explain that we're asking for it due to Headley rollbacks. There may be reasons why you won't want to explain that, and I can get into that. I don't know if it's on the next slide, Claire, but if not, I'll address it. Yeah. So what happens if you want to exceed that 0.5 mil? So what do you do? Either because the rollbacks are too great, or another common situation is that you realize that even if you restored the 1 mil, it's not enough. you need to ask at least, your occupancy, maybe you've got a new building in the meantime, or you've expanded, and so you need additional hours, you need additional staff, and so the 1 mil for operations is just not cutting it anymore. If that's the case, there's a couple things you could do. One, you can ask for 2 questions. You can ask for a renewal of the millage, and then ask for new mills if the new mills are greater than 0.5. That's always an option. The other option is basically forgetting about the renewal part of it. Just not telling voters it's a renewal, and asking for, let's just say in this situation, you need, you need 2 mills and you've only been levying 1 mill. So one mill is an additional new millage. It's over the 0.5. So you can't ask for it in 1 question. You can ask the voters for a new millage of 2 mills, and just, I mean, most of the time, I think people want the word renewal in there. They think in the minds of voters, and I understand that there might be a different mindset if they're just renewing something versus seeing something else. But that's where voter education also can take place to help you with some of those questions. Library board must adopt a resolution to put it on the ballot, and keep in mind that you can only have 2 elections every calendar year. And now that we're reduced our election dates, this, I don't see people running into this too much. But for example, if you lose an election in May, you can only go back either in August or November, and you can't go back in both. You can't try 3 times in 1 year. So that's another thing to consider when you decide what, if you've got a ballot. If you're a community that, your ballot usually passes by a razor thin margin, you might want to start a year or 2 ahead of time to get that, to make sure that you have enough elections, in order to pass the ballot proposal. If you are a community that your proposals pass with flying colors every year and you don't have to worry about it, you might not have to be worried about this. But keep in mind, if you're a township or a city, you have to coordinate with your city or township, because it won't just be the library millage that will be considered in this 2 times. It'll be other millages. So if you put a library millage on in May, and the township puts a fire millage on in August, you might not be able to put your library millage back on in November. That's, again, something to run by your legal counsel and working with the township, city, or village to make sure that's all coordinated. Ballots, important deadlines, they must be certified by the county clerk 70 days before the election. The state of Michigan puts out an election calendar for every election. Make sure that you look at the election calendar, because that will be the guiding force. One of the biggest things that I've run into is that on every election calendar, it gives you the date a petition to put a local proposal in is due, and then about 2 weeks later, it's the date that the actual ballot language is due. The petition is something that would be, for example, if you were creating a new PA 164 library by petition, that petition has to be due 2 weeks before the actual ballot language is due. I make this point only because I get a lot of clients that say the county clerk says it has to, or the township clerk says it has to be in by X date, and that's really the wrong date. You usually have it 2 weeks more. Again, we don't usually like you cutting it that close, but again, making sure that everyone's on the same page with what date it has to be approved by your library board before it's put on the ballot is important. So always verify the date. The actual language should be approved by a resolution of the library board. For district libraries, the District Library Establishment Act was changed, and then they changed the election law, and it sort of doesn't really work all that well, because it requires you to notify, if you have a school district that's participating municipality, you have to certify to the school district election coordinator the ballot proposal. Usually, in most cases, the school district election coordinator duties have been then further delegated to the county clerk. So really, you're only talking about one person. But make sure your ballot language is, if you have a school district libraries, make sure that you have the right language in there that says you sent it at least to whoever the school district election coordinator is, even though they probably don't have any true substantive duties. Campaign finance law. Um, it looks a little self-serving here to say seek attorney review of your millage materials, but we recommend it because usually when there's a problem, it's discovered after the materials have been out and after somebody's complained about it. And it really is well worth your time to have attorney review if you are sending out materials. Okay. So the Michigan Campaign Finance Act says that you cannot spend public funds promoting a ballot proposal. So what that means to you as a library is that you really have two options. One of which is to use library money to explain to voters what the ballot is all about. This cannot be persuasive. It cannot be subjective. It cannot be, vote yes, those types of things. Those things can be done by what we call a ballot question committee, and I'll get into that a little bit in a minute. But if you decide that you want to spend public money with a ballot proposal, you have to understand that it has to be basically purely factual. And that means, in my opinion, that everything you put in that material should be supported by an objective fact, statistics, facts. If, for example, we see a lot, like if you don't vote for this millage, we're going to have to cut out Sunday hours. Well, if that's true, let's take that. If the board has already voted to do that, then we could be persuaded that that's factual. But if that's just aspirational, or you think that might happen if they don't vote, you can't put that in there because it's not a fact. It's heartbreaking for me to take out this sentence because it happens a lot where you say, our staff is the best staff. We have the best library, we have the best staff. And it's not to say that you don't have a wonderful staff, but that is a subjective statement. It's not objective. Now, if you've won the best staff of the year award by some organization, you can tell them that. But again, you got to make sure it's purely factual and not promotional or aspirational, because a violation of this is a misdemeanor. And people can complain to the state of Michigan about it, and then they investigate it, and it causes extra heartburn for you that you don't need. So it's less expensive for us to look at it first, for example, as a library attorney, than for us to defend a library in a complaint for campaign finance. It gets very murky with public employees with policymaking authority and without policymaking authority. So public employees without policymaking authority are prohibited from expressing views on behalf of the public body. This is your staff. So don't put your staff in a difficult position by putting millage material or information about the millage at your circulation desk, because if patrons pick up that material, they're going to ask your circulation, who's ever working at the circulation desk. It's probably going to be somebody without policymaking authority. Remember, public funds can't be used toward promoting a library millage. That includes time. So if someone's on the clock and explaining to a patron why they should be voting yes on a millage at the library, that's going to be a Campaign Finance Act violation. So be very careful about that, what kind of situation you might put your employees. You're also prohibited from expressing your own personal views and distributing information during working hours. If you're working at the library, if you're an hourly worker, it's a little easier. If you're clocked out at the end of the day and you want to go door to door promoting the millage after that, that's fine. If you are someone who is salaried, just make sure that it's not done during the hours you're scheduled to work. So those are the types of things. Employees without policymaking authority who are salaried to refrain from promoting the election during the hours when they are scheduled to work. Unfortunately, this is a lot. The director this happens a lot, especially if the director is sort of investigating, or helping the ballot question committee. Makes very clear that if that's the case, that it's done off hours. So let's see, next one. So because public bodies are prohibited from using public funds to promote any millage campaigns, any lawn signs, brochures, or buttons telling the public to vote yes or vote for the library may not be purchased with public funds. Public funds are also not limited to tax revenue. I get this a lot. Gifts and donations made during the made to the public body are still public funds and may not be used for promotion of the campaign. We do get this a lot. We get someone who will, you know, donate $500 to do vote yes lawn signs. If the library can't take those public funds and donated funds and then use them towards that. So. Use of a facility by the committee promoting the election. So I want to talk a little bit about, so what are your options? Your options, I said, are to use public funds, but they can only be objective, non-persuasive. The other is to establish a ballot question committee. Ballot question committees are formed. They're pretty simple to form. The real thing you need is a good treasurer. There's great information on the state of Michigan's election website about how to form a ballot question committee. What are the rules? What are the deadlines for filing the reports and all of that? If a group desires to spend over $500 promoting the campaign, a ballot question committee should be formed. And that's collectively, and it's a little hard to kind of understand that, but if you've got it's not, you can't just say, well, you know, I'm going to spend $400, you're going to spend $400, someone else is going to spend $400. We don't need to form a ballot question committee. But if it's an effort like that together and if it's over $400 or over $500, it has to be in a formal ballot question committee. You're independent from the library. Those ballot question committees can tell voters to vote yes. They can say, save our library. They can say, this is the best staff in the state of Michigan. They can say all those things that you want to say, but are legally prohibited. They can say that. Often the friends of the library are very instructive, or they usually tend to be the people that are the ballot question committee. But I do want to explain that the library, the ballot question committee, and the friends of the library are actually 3 different organizations. So the friends, you know, can become a ballot question committee, members of them, but the Friends itself is not the ballot question committee. It's very complicated, but if there's any questions, anyone can call me about it. I'm happy to talk to them about that. But make sure that's really, because people talk about the Friends being the ballot question committee, and then it just is not the same thing. So, but usually if you've got a great friends group and are very active in promoting the library and fundraising, they're typically the people you could tap to be the ballot question committee. I do not recommend any of the library, the director or any board member also be an executive on the ballot question committee. I don't think it's specifically prohibited. It's really a bad idea. If you're the treasurer of the library board and the treasurer of the ballot question committee, it just is, it's not a good look. So we actually recommend people stay away from that. Let's see. One more. Oh, questions. So I know that's a lot of information. That was a lot of talking for me. Usually this presentation, I get a lot of questions during the presentation that breaks it up, and I can get people's questions. So I don't know. I saw people I don't know if we have 34 questions or people were what type of library they were at first, but
yeah, there's a few. And I actually get a lot of questions about boards and yes, committees. So thanks for the clarification there. So we have a question. Due to the vacant Michigan District 8 Senate seat, there will be a special primary election in August and special general election in November. Our library is in this district. Would you confirm there would be no cost for the library to add a millage question to either of these ballots?
I will not confirm that. Okay. And the reason is, and I haven't gotten to the bottom of it, and Claire may have seen this too. I would say traditionally libraries have not been charged for putting ballot proposals on what is considered to be a general election. The district library, I don't have it right in front of me, but it basically says that they can charge the incremental costs. I have seen this past year for the first time libraries being charged for additional charges for their ballot proposals. So that's something that I think is an important question for your library to ask your particular county clerk, whether there will be additional charges. I will tell you it's probably the less expensive time to do it if they're having an election anyway. Tacking your election onto an existing election is always going to be less expensive than having it by yourself. But I can't tell you. I would have been more confident even 2 years ago that you probably wouldn't be charged extra, but based on just what I'm hearing around the state, I don't think you can guarantee that anymore.
So there's a couple different questions here talking about whether something would be considered new or a renewal.
Okay.
One of them is if you have a millage and you're going to renew it for the same amount, but the purpose is different. Is that a new millage?
Okay, so here's the trick to this. Okay, and this is you're gonna need to get specific legal review on it. If I think if the purpose is slightly different, it's going to depend. Because, for example, I'm very comfortable fixing a problem where the intent, I believe the intent was the same. So, for example, if the millage 20 years ago just said for operating, and I want to clarify that it's for all district library purposes, I'm comfortable calling that a renewal, because I believed that back 20 years ago, that's what they meant. It's for everything. You know, anything that the library needs money for, this we can spend this money on. I'm a little bit less comfortable if you ask for millage, for example, to construct a new building only, and then you want to transform that millage into a general for everything in the kitchen sink type of millage. I think there could be some risk to that, but that's something that will depend on the specific issue, what language you're talking about, what you want to transform it to, and basically whether, you know, how risk adverse your board is. But that's probably a specific discussion for your board. The issue, and I think I saw this, Claire, the other sort of similar issue is, can you do a different time frame and still call it a renewal? Okay, so the statute refers only to the amount of the millage when they put all these restrictions on whether you can call it a renewal or not. So again, I think it makes sense that, you know, I think about it more, this would happen more in like a township city perspective, but I think you can understand that I would feel very uncomfortable if you've got a 0.5 police millage, it's ending, and you want to call it a renewal and it's for roads. I mean, those to me, I think that would not really pass the smell test. But I am a lot more comfortable with changing the duration, as long as people understand it's really not been addressed yet in the law, and no one's really sued over it, so we don't really know what will happen. But I feel a little bit more comfortable with that. I also feel a little bit more comfortable because sometimes what you do is, let's just say you've got two millages. You've got a 0.5 mill that you did 15 years ago, and you have another 0.5 that you want to do now. You want them eventually to both expire at the same time, so you can combine them into one instead of having all these individual little millages. There's a way I think you can do that, assuming the purpose is the same, by changing the duration a little bit. And that's something that you should talk to your lawyer about, the pros and cons and where some of the pitfalls may be in that. But I'm a little more comfortable with changing the duration and still being able to call it a renewal.
We have a staff that's pretty active on social media. Should we advise them to not explicitly talk about the millage on social media, even if they're off the clock?
I don't think you can prevent an individual employee for promoting on their own personal social media page. If it's on the library's social media page, that's a different story. If they're, you know, arguably on the clock, if they're using Facebook, you know, because that can be really bad if you're using Facebook at work when you're not supposed to be, and then you post something. Now you got a couple problems here, you know. But if, you know, if an employee clocks out at 5 o'clock, he or she goes home on their personal Facebook page and says, "Hey, you know, go out and vote for the millage," that's perfectly fine.
Can the Friends spend money they already have on a millage campaign?
Yes, to an extent. So Friends are typically a 501c3, And if they spend too much money advocating for something, it turns them into a lobbying organization and they may risk their 501c3 status. Where that line is, and I'm sorry, I didn't look it up before because I think that's something that the 50, I think that's something that the Friends, the library should not be advising the Friends on their tax exempt status because it's usually between 5 and 10%. And I can't remember if it's like net proceeds or gross revenue. It's something like that, but that's, I would, if, as the library, I would have them investigate that on their own, and you should be advising them on how much they can contribute in order to save their tax exempt status, but it's an issue.
So we have a couple questions asking about city millages. One asks if a city millage under city section 1, if one of the 2 mills can be, if the voted millage can be in perpetuity.
Oh, let me, hang on a second.
Or is it limited by the 20 years?
I have to look that up. Can you give me a different question until I...
Is a city under section 10 limited to 2 mills?
Yes.
Yeah, 2 mills total.
2 mills total, yeah. Let me look at the, just I look at this I have to look at this every time because the problem with libraries is there's so many different kinds of libraries and they all have different rules.
Yep.
So if approved by a majority of the voters, the city council may increase. The statute doesn't give a tax limitation. I suspect most cities are going to be limited by 20 years. So that's something that I think your attorney and the city attorney should come to some understanding about, because I would, if it, my rule of thumb is that if it's unclear, if it's silent and there's no authority otherwise, I think it's limited to the 20 years that the constitutional limitation is. So that would be, that's an interesting question, but I'd have that discussion, but I suspect that would be the answer. Claire, do you have a different take?
Nope, I go with you. I would agree. And incidentally, I would fully encourage you to your board or for the library directors to really get a relationship with your municipality. Municipalities are looking for money right now, and I have had a couple calls from particularly township municipalities. Now, this is calls from the municipality, not from the library, asking me if they can fiddle with the library millage, if they can change the amount the library wants to levy. So I think that's important that, you know, you have those relationships so the municipality understands what they can and cannot do, and that you know what's going on.
And Claire brings up a really important point because, okay, so it's very clear for district libraries. So we have no problem with district libraries. Section 10 and 10A, township, village, and city libraries have a real problem because you're governed by an 1877 statute that hasn't changed that much. It's very clear that you have the authority to place the millage on the ballot. What's sort of up in the air is whether the city has to pass its own resolution to put it on the ballot. I think that there's enough evidence right now. I know we had this issue years and years ago where I was representing an organization that wanted to form a new township, a new city 10A library, and we had the petition and we had the ballot proposal, or we had the millage resolution all ready to go. City council refused to put it on the ballot. They didn't want to touch this hot potato issue with the 10-foot pole. And so the county clerk accepted our ballot language as petitioners. My thought is at this point, it's if you have a great relationship with the city, they're fully on board. Sometimes it's a belt and suspenders approach, but it might not be a bad idea to have the library board approve it and then have the city council approve it or the township board. This is probably my advice 15 years ago would have been to do this. Now I'm a little more hesitant of giving that general advice because I think it's very situational. There are some times where I have the library say, call the county clerk. If the county clerk's going to approve this ballot proposal without you sending it to the township or city, go ahead and do that. And I usually have them, you know, do it way in advance. So if there's any problems we can consider, because I don't think the city, township, village has the authority to be the roadblock here. But if if you actually ask them to put it, you know, pass a city council resolution to put it on the ballot, it implies that they have some say in it, right?
Mhm.
And then if they said, well, we want to change the ballot, and then we say, oh, never mind, you don't really, you know, forget it, we'll just put it, you know, it can cause a little confusion and a problem. So if you are in that circumstance, I would plan in advance to kind of work it out with your city or talk to your lawyer about the best way to go about that. If you're in Oakland County, I know that they will take it without going through the city first. That's the only one I'm pretty sure about, because I've done it.
You said you don't recommend putting millage promotional info at the desk, service desk, because it would prompt a patron to question a staff. But do you also recommend not putting it anywhere on the floor because a patron may bring it to the desk? This would be speaking of a factual sheet of statistic information with no vote yes or similar wording.
No, I think you can put factual information out at the library, but if you do that, you have to instruct your staff to do it to, I just don't like it at the circulation desk primarily because I think that invites the most opportunity. But there's nothing that prohibits you from putting purely factual material out at the library.
I have a building millage that's expiring and one bond payment left. I have extra funds available and I am not sure what I can do with it. It depends on what the language said and whether or not it was specific to construction.
Is it a bond? If it's a, we're not talking about bonds here, we're talking about millages.
It says a building millage. Is Samantha there on? Can she unmute? There you are.
Here I am. Okay, so it's the millage raising the money to pay the bond.
I'd have to see the millage proposal.
I have been looking for it this entire presentation and I have no idea.
So I would dig out the actual millage proposal, because that's going to have your answer. Because I asked because the bonds have different rules about what you can spend the money on in a voted bond, and I'm not qualified to answer those questions. I'm not a bond lawyer to the extent that would I
am not either.
but you know, a lot of time, I mean, I think you can certainly, I would first dig out your ballot language and see what it says, because if it says, because a lot of those ballot languages, the ones that we draft, are very general, and they just say for construction operating, because you kind of assume that there might be additional operating costs, so you might not have a problem, is what I'm saying. So before you we figure out a solution to the problem, you know, I think you should dig out that language and figure out if you have a problem.
Fair enough. I asked another question, if I can be pushy now.
Yes, I just see it right here. Both my building and my operating millages are expiring. I want a higher operating millage, but one that is lower than the two millages combined we're bringing in. A new millage is the best route, right?
Depends on the amount. I mean, I think if you're going to combine two separate purposes into one, I think probably the answer would be yes, because it would probably have to be a new millage. But again, I think that's a pretty fact-specific thing. I'd like to look at those before I give you a definitive answer. I probably have to look at what the ballot proposals are.
And then there's a question about how much friends groups can contribute. And I think we talked about that. That really depends on the friends group. If they're a 501c3, how much they can contribute to a yes committee. Is this an annual consideration? Again, I think that just depends on what the money is being used for. If it's for yes committee or millage, then that's a political campaign contribution and falls under the restrictions of the 501c3. If it's not, then that's just friends money, right? Yeah. Let's see. Who has the information about our millage? And I am guessing Kat means her ballot language. I got a copy of the ballot proposal from the last time it was passed, but it doesn't match what I have from the Library of Michigan. Okay, Kat, we can discuss that separately. I'm not sure what you got from the Library of Michigan. But if you have a copy of the ballot proposal, again, it depends where you got it from. I'm not sure exactly what you are looking at, but in theory, and what I recommend people do, and then Anne can put in her information. I usually, so if there's nothing in the file that we have at Library of Michigan, I usually suggest, or I help people, I go through newspapers and pull ballot information. I go to the county election archives and pull the information that they have from the election. And you can also, go to your county and ask for them to pull it out of their files, or you can talk to your attorney and see if they have it in their files. Anne?
Yeah, and I think, some of it, as the attorney, sometimes I'll tell you a recent story. I panicked because I pulled it out of my file and I was like, oh my goodness, they missed the dead, it expired a year ago. And so now we have a problem. Well, I didn't know that they changed it at the meeting. So I sent the ballot proposal to the client. They changed it at the meeting and put like a 7-year instead of a 5-year. So in my files, it said 5 years. So I think the county clerk, or if you're a PA 164 library, it'll be the township clerk, should have a record of that. If they don't, I think you can call Claire, you can call your lawyer and see what you think the best way of getting that. But typically what you want to see is what was actually on the ballot instead of like a Word document that's in your file. That's what I,
Right. That's why I tend to rely on the ballot archives at the different counties.
Yes.
To show exactly what the language was on the ballot.
Yeah.
If you're a city library, can the city manager and the city council promote the library campaign? Vote yes. Oh, no, they cannot. Even I know that.
They're under the same rules you are, yeah.
If our millage fails in August, we can try again in November. It looks like there will be about 1 week between the August election and the deadline for filing for the November election. Is that correct?
Yes, to both counts. And that's assuming that you're only using 2 elections that calendar year and you didn't go in May.
Joe Hamlin told me we have a 2 mil that expires in December. Oh, okay, Kat. Okay. Well, Joe probably pulled that out of the data records he keeps on, after millage is passed. Joe puts them all in the spreadsheet. So I would double check the actual ballot language, like Anne suggested. And then let's see, the city has wording about reducing the Headley rollback. Okay. If you're talking about the existing ballot, again, I would go with what was on the actual ballot.
Yeah. The other thing to really be careful of, and I've seen it happen. It doesn't happen very often, but I've seen it happen, especially if there's a change over at the county level. But a lot of people rely on the L4029 because usually the L4029, when you fill it out, it says it was operating, and then it tells you when it expires. They don't always get that right. So if I was going to suggest anything for homework, it would be to pull out your, to pull out your ballot proposals, sooner than later, and make sure that the L4029 is correct.
We have a question here asking about the Headley rollback. I have no clue what it is. Does it affect district libraries? I can tell you, MSU Extension has a really good explanation of the Headley rollback. If you just Google MSU Extension Headley rollback, but I'm going to throw it to Anne and she can also, I'm sure, explain it.
I'm going to severely dumb it down because that's how I understand it, because I think it's so complicated. I actually gave a webinar on it, and the amount of preparation that I had to do to be able to understand it myself was a lot. So basically, it's what it did is they tried to, let's just say you have 1 mil and 1 mil raises 500,000. Well, in some communities, they started to see, well, if you have got a big housing boom, right? All of a sudden your 1 mil is raising 700,000. It's raising like 1,000, So what they did is they tried to, the rollbacks are tried to keep it more at a steady rate so that the 1 mil will raise about the same amount every year. So what they do is they roll it back, because if they figure 1 mill will raise 500,000. If property taxes increase, then if they roll it back to 0.97, it'll raise 500,000. So that's really the theory behind it. It's a formula based on like additional like property tax and additional value, and it's a complicated factor, which I'm telling you sitting here, I could not recite to you, and I will not try. I will probably have to go to the MSU extension site to get that information. But you can see kind of the theory behind it is that it's supposed to keep the property taxes, the amount collected even when there's a huge boom. And if there's not, if let's just say like in 2008 and 2009 when property taxes dropped, there was no reduction because they kept it at the same level, and actually probably the amount that you collected probably was reduced, but they didn't have any rollbacks. So for probably 4 or 5 years after like 2008, 2009, I was seeing hardly any rollbacks, and now I'm starting to see them again. So.
Okay. Our millage was approved for collection from December 2014 to December 2021 inclusive, and we do not plan to pay for a special election in 2021. Our plan was to put it on for renewal in August 2022 with language stating levying from 2022 to 2029 inclusive. So there would be no gap in collection if approved. Can we still call this a renewal since the vote will occur in the same fiscal year of the levying authority as the expiring millage, or do we have to call it a new millage since the final approved levy occurred prior to the vote?
You can still call it a renewal as long as there's no gap in years of levy, in my opinion. I think there's some factual differences of this, so if there's questions about it, I mean, that's something that when you go to have your attorney draft it, that's an issue that should be raised, but typically, unless there's a gap in the year, you could still call it a renewal.
I see that Kate from Woodlands put the link to the MSU in there. Thank you, Kate. I like the idea of headless better than headly also. I would like to mention, while I have the opportunity, all of you looking at your millage rates, remember that you must have 3/10 of a mil of local support in order to be eligible for state aid. So you want to consider that when you're thinking of your millage amounts, that you need to have 3/10 of a mil of local support. Does Headley take into account an increase in population?
It's about taxes. It's
yeah.
About value. So it sort of goes hand in hand. You got more people moving in. They're typically buying houses and all that stuff. So you probably have seen it increase with population, but it's tied specifically to taxable value.
Okay, and it looks like those are the questions. We do have a little bit more time. If anyone has anything that they would like to ask, you can unmute yourself. Oh, there are a couple bills working their way through the legislature that could affect millages. So I encourage you, if you do, peruse what the legislature is doing. They are trying to again knock out election, another election day, so that there's fewer days for elections in Michigan. They also are proposing that you could not have more than one millage per ballot question. So I actually have a question about that. And if someone is asking for a renewal and a Headley override, I wonder if that would be two millages in one ballot question.
Well, I'd have to look at what the wording is.
Right.
I mean, I think what they're trying, I saw a lot of cities doing this about 5 years ago, where they would ask for like a huge amount, like 2-3 mills, let's say a large amount of mills. And then they'd say it's for fire, police, and then maybe something kind of unpopular, like, I don't know. Right. I don't want to suggest what would be unpopular, but like something that they suspected that the public wouldn't really vote for. But, they want police and fire, so they have to approve all of it. You know what I mean? And they don't divvy up you know, and they vote for that and they realize of the 3 mills, 0.5 is going to police and 0.25 is going to fire. And then, you know, 2.25 is going to, you know, unpopular subject. Those are the types of things I think this is getting at. So I'm hoping that the final wording, I'd have to look at it, wouldn't prevent the one purpose, but just a renewal and new millage.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything they want to mention?
I have a question.
Sure.
So Claire, for the 0.3 mils minimum to receive state aid, we are right on the edge of that if we don't renew. Does that but that's just operating. So does the 0.3 mils include what we might owe for bond or new building projects?
The 0.3 of a mil, it's worded as local support. So I know, you know, Kathy Webb, who calculates all of that, the goal is to give you money. The Library of Michigan, as the state aid kind of gatekeepers, there's no instance where we want to tell you you can't have money. So Kathy Webb does everything she can to call anything she can local support. So essentially the question is yes, as long as the money that you're getting is from a millage, or if it's, you know, if it's a voted bond. Kathy Webb has even worked with libraries for like in-kind arrangements, so that if you have, you know, if you get free rent from your township, you know, what's the value of that rent? If you're right on the border of not meeting your 0.3 of a mil, Kathy Webb is very good at finding, you know, that extra quote unquote local support. So you might want to talk to her if you're right on the line. There are libraries that don't make it, but I know that Kathy Webb works very hard to kind of get people to that 0.3 of a mil. I think a lot of times when people don't make it, sometimes there's contracts that call for penal fines and state aid, and then those populations, it doesn't equal the 0.3 of a mil. And so sometimes that counts against a library, you know, with contracts that's trying to meet that 0.3 of a mil.
Okay. It sounds like we're very safe compared based on your explanation. So thanks.
Sure.
I think we might have a couple more chat questions.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. I'm looking for the bottom. Should we have a millage vote? Should we have a millage vote in 2021 or 2022? I don't know if this was, I'm trying to look. Oh, it's a two-part. Maybe I should start from the top. Claire, where did you, I'm gonna let Claire figure out where you left off.
Which question is this?
I was answering the bottom question, but I think it had to do with a question. So I don't know where we left off with a question. So maybe we'll just go through in order.
So is that Lisa?
No, it's Christy from, I just was curious. It said our millage was in 2017 to 2021. Does that, will we collect through 2022, or should we have the millage, and should the millage be in the vote, should that be in 2021 or 2022? That's where I get confused.
Well, you can collect the December 2021 is the last collection that you'll have.
Okay.
But you can ask for a new millage either in 2021 or in 2022. Here's one thing I think I failed to mention is that if you ask for a millage, I think it's the cutoff date, I think is like April 3rd. Well, I forget what it is, but it's like May. Claire, do you know, like if you ask for it in August or November and you levy it that December, it's not going to be rolled back. But if you go, let's just say you ask for a millage in 2021 that won't be levied in 2022, it will already be subject to one Headley rollback by the time you levy it.
Okay.
The rollbacks start at the date of the authorization, not at the date of the levy.
Okay.
This question on my city voted no on multiple police millages. Any suggestions from Lorena? I would contact Shirley Bursama, who, and I can send you her email address. I'll see if I can put it in the chat. She is kind of like the Yoda of millages. There you are. She has it. It's
I can send it, but it wants it.
She's awesome at working with the library and a community on getting millage passes, and I think she's only ever lost like 3 millages in like her entire like 50-year career of helping libraries pass millages.
She goes over that kind of stuff. Claire's
Yeah,
right.
I would definitely talk to her, and I'll get her email address for you. I know part of it. I just can't remember the entire thing off the top of my head. Is it Anne? Do you have it there?
I do. It's how do I type it in the
LIBSARG, and what's the rest of it?
LIBSABI? I'll just type it in the chat. How's that?
That'd be great.
Okay. You can take the next question.
Yeah. Do you have suggestions for how we go about selecting an attorney to assist us through this process? What would be important questions to ask? Well, you have the perfect attorney right here.
Well,
But, and do you have suggestions?
yeah, I would ask about their experiencing drafting millage proposals, because I think that's going to be the real issue. And you know, a lot of local municipal attorneys know how to do it. If you're, you know, I would ask about their specific, you know, with respect to your specific type of library too, if they understand the ins and outs of being a PA 164 library, because you just want to make sure they have the right experience. But most city and township attorneys have experience drafting municipal proposals, but I just would make sure that they have the right type of experience and they've done it enough where they can see some of the issues, because you know, it's important to get it right.
Anybody else? Well, Anne puts Shirley's information. There you go. And as I said, she's amazing, Shirley, as well as Anne. So we are at 11:27. We are set to be done 11:30. So it looks like we are just right on time. Thank you everyone for coming. I hope that you got some good information. I'd like to thank Anne for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, anytime. And I think that's it. If anyone has any questions or needs assistance, don't hesitate to give us a buzz. You can email Anne, you can email myself. I'll put Anne's slide back up with her contact information on, in case everyone didn't get a chance to see it. There it is. So you can copy it down. And I thank you all for coming.